Assalamualaikum, my name is Arfat and welcome to a brand new video. Today's video I'd like to share with you a passage from John chapter 15, verse 5, the famous passage about I am the vine, you are the branches. And I'm reading from NIV and I'm just going to read to you. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourself to be my disciples. Verse 9. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. This is a very, very striking passage, and this passage has not been really looked upon based on my research. This passage is very striking to me because this shows the separation between the Father and the Son, between Jesus and his Father. Now, there are many other passages that struck this as well, but I find that this passage is the one that is a bit lengthy, whereby there is an explanation that we can really use to argue against the Trinitarian concept. And this passage in John, I believe, is very primitive because the Christology is quite similar to that of the Synoptics. Whereas in some of the passages in John, like the prologue to John, for example, this must have come much later on. And this somehow proved the theory that Raymond Brown and others have been proposing, that the Gospel according to John was probably composed in different periods of time. So one of the primitive passages here that I can read due to the low Christology is the I am the vine, you are the branches passage. Now, if Christians were to take the Gospel of John literally and say that no, Jesus and the Father are one, meaning that Jesus is and the Father, they are one, however you want to read into that, then if they are consistent, then the passage here, if you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Meaning that if the disciples do not remain in Jesus, if you were to take this literally, meaning the disciples is inside Jesus, obviously no one will interpret it this way. And so why the inconsistency in interpreting I and the Father are one to mean that Jesus is Yahweh? That just doesn't make sense. I think that is just pushing the passage too far. And none of the critical scholars would agree that Jesus is actually Yahweh, because in fact the passage is very clear. Jesus is not Yahweh. If you read the Gospel of John in a Trinitarian view or via a Trinitarian lens, then that is not the right way to read the Gospel of John. You have to read the Gospel in its own context. Meaning, if the Gospel of John is written around the year 95, for example, then you have to read the Gospel of John using the context of its era. The Trinitarian idea came about 300 years after, in 381 CE. It doesn't even come during the Council of Nicaea, because after the Council of Nicaea, the church went back to Arianism, though it's a different strands of Arianism, Neo-Arian, and Homoian Arian, things like that. But the Trinitarian concept was only nailed, or at least the foundation of it, in the year 381. And so if we were to use the understanding of the people in the year 381 and we were to read it back into the Gospel according to John, which was written way earlier than that, around the year 95, 300 years before, almost 300 years before. Then we have done the text injustice, and we have basically ignored the proper reading of the text. And so the Gospel of John cannot be taken literally when we have such passages that proposes a kind of Trinitarian dogma, or a kind of the concept whereby Jesus is Yahweh, because these ideas all came much later on. And if we were to be anachronistic and read passages like that, then we can interpret even the most Unitarian passage to mean something else than what it actually says and meant. The idea is that even Origen of Alexandria and Alexander of Alexandria and all these early church fathers, why did they not interpret the Gospel of John in a Trinitarian way? These are learned people, very smart people, even though they have been influenced by Neoplatonism and Aristotelianism, but none of them before the Council of Constantinople believe in a Trinity. They believe that Jesus is somewhat divine, though the Unitarians would say that in what aspect was Jesus divine. These are the language that they use, just like John Dominic Crossan would say, these are the language that they use. But what they meant is a completely different thing, like what other scholars have been saying all along. And so I believe that people should look at the vine and the branches passage, chapter 15, verse 5 of the Gospel according to John. And this is a very enlightening passage, because it clearly demonstrates the separation between Jesus, and that Jesus has come to follow his Father's commandment. And so that, and when the disciples follow his commandment, then they will be joyous. They will receive a kind of, they will be guaranteed that they will be safe in the life to come. And so this passage really struck me, and I've watched a lot of debates, and I realized that not a lot of people actually have given much attention to this passage, when in fact this is actually a very primitive passage in the Gospel of John because of its low Christology. We find this very similar in Matthew, the concept of it in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and even in Corinthians, the Pauline letter, whereby there's a separation. The head of Christ is God. And so this is quite a very striking passage if you were to draw parallels. And so with this, I must conclude that, in my opinion, this is actually a very primitive passage. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me in this very short video today. We passed 100 subscribers. Thank you so much. I'll probably plan a Q&A soon, maybe just for a very short while, inshallah ta'ala. My name is Arfat, and I'll see you on my next video. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.